Welcome to Revenge with Luna. The carpet was rough against my cheek. I remember thinking how strange that was, how I could notice that texture, the scratch of cheap fiber against my skin, when my body had completely stopped cooperating with me. My legs had gone first. One moment I was standing at my desk, reaching for my coffee mug, and the next I was on the floor of my office, the ceiling rotating slowly above me like a lazy ceiling fan. My coworker was the one who found me. I heard her voice before I could see her face clearly, that particular pitch a person reaches when they are trying very hard not to sound as panicked as they feel. Oh my God. Oh my God. Somebody call 911. Her hands were on my shoulders, and I wanted to tell her I was fine, that this was just low blood sugar or stress, or the fact that I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 weeks. But my mouth wouldn't form the words. My tongue felt like something that belonged to someone else. The paramedic who crouched over me had steady eyes, dark, focused, the kind that don't flinch. He asked me my name. He asked me if I knew where I was. When I tried to answer, what came out was a low sound that embarrassed me more than anything, not words, just effort. He checked my pupils. His jaw tightened. He looked at his partner and said something I couldn't fully hear, but I caught 2 words clearly enough. Unusual presentation. And somewhere behind me, beyond the ring of coworkers who had gathered in the doorway of my office, someone was already on the phone. A voice I recognized even through the fog. My husband. He must have been called already. He was saying, "She does this sometimes. She gets overwhelmed. She's been under a lot of stress." The paramedic didn't look up from my vitals. He said, "Sir, we need you to step back." My husband said, "I'm her husband." The paramedic said it again. Calm, absolute. Step back. And in the narrow space between those words and the sound of the gurney wheels unfolding, I felt something shift. Not in my body was still betraying me completely. It shifted somewhere behind my ribs. A small cold thing, the beginning of understanding. I had been married for 4 years. My husband was charming in the way that makes people at parties lean toward him, laugh a little too quickly, agree a little too easily. His mother had moved into our guest room 8 months ago, after what she described as a falling out with a neighbor that had made her feel unsafe in her own home. At the time, I had said yes because he asked me with his hand on my face, and his voice low and gentle, the way it used to be in the beginning. And because I believed that people who love each other make room. What I did not know then, what I was only beginning to understand now, strapped to a gurney and moving through the fluorescent hallway of my own office building, was that saying yes to her moving in had been the last real decision I made for myself in 8 months. The vitamins started 2 weeks after she arrived. My husband set them on the kitchen counter every morning next to my coffee. A small white pill and a capsule that he said was a magnesium supplement, something his mother had recommended for the headaches I'd been having. I didn't ask questions. I was tired. I had been tired since she moved in, a slow, creeping exhaustion that I attributed to the tension of sharing space with a woman who rearranged my kitchen cabinets and commented on what I ate for breakfast. The headaches had been real enough, so had the dizziness. The confusion that started arriving mid-afternoon like an uninvited guest who got comfortable and refused to leave. I had gone to my doctor twice. Both times the tests came back unremarkable. Both times I left feeling like I was somehow manufacturing my own symptoms, which is exactly what my mother-in-law told me when I mentioned seeing the doctor a second time. Some people, she said, setting her teacup down with precision, are just very sensitive to the ordinary pressures of life. My husband had agreed with a small nod. He had a talent for that, agreeing with her in a way that made me feel like the two of them had rehearsed it. At the hospital, a nurse drew 4 vials of blood before I had stopped shaking enough to answer questions properly. My head had cleared marginally, the way air clears when you step outside from a room that had gone stale without you noticing. The ER doctor was a woman with short hair and no patience for evasion. She asked me the same questions the paramedic had asked, and then several more. She asked what medications I was currently taking. I listed them. She asked about supplements. I told her about the vitamins my husband gave me every morning. Her expression did not change, but her pen moved faster. My husband arrived 40 minutes after I did. I heard him before I saw him, his voice carrying through the curtain the particular cadence he used when he wanted to appear cooperative. Concerned husband. Steady presence. He had perfected it. He came in and put his hand on my arm and said, "You scared me." His eyes swept the room, taking inventory. The doctor returned 20 minutes later. She came in alone, pulled the curtain closed behind her, and sat down in the chair next to my bed in a way that told me this was not a brief visit. She told me the preliminary panel had flagged something, that she had ordered a more comprehensive toxicology screen, that she had also, while I was being processed, spoken to the paramedic who transported me because his notes had included an observation she found significant. He had documented that the person identifying himself as my husband had attempted to follow the gurney into the ambulance bay and had become, in the paramedic's words, agitated when redirected. She asked me, quietly and directly, whether I felt safe at home. The question sat between us. I looked at my hands. I thought about the vitamins lined up on the counter every morning like small, loyal soldiers. I thought about the way my mother-in-law watched me swallow them, always from across the kitchen, always with that particular quality of attention that I had told myself was just her difficult personality. I thought about the 4 hours of sleep, and the headaches and the afternoon fog, and the 2 unremarkable doctor's visits and the growing certainty, which I had been suppressing for months the way you push a cork back into a bottle, that something was wrong with me that had nothing to do with sensitivity to the ordinary pressures of life. I said, "I don't know." She nodded like that was exactly the answer she had expected. The detective arrived before the toxicology results did. He was older, unhurried, with a legal pad and a way of asking questions that made them feel like conversation. He asked me to describe my typical morning. I did. He asked me who else had access to the vitamins. I told him they were kept on the kitchen counter. He wrote that down. He asked whether my mother-in-law had ever expressed opinions about my health, my finances, my marriage. I started to give the careful, diplomatic answer I had trained myself to give, and then stopped, and told the truth instead. She had commented, more than once, that I was not well suited to stress, that I had always seemed fragile to her, even before she moved in. That she worried she always framed it as worry about whether I was capable of managing the responsibilities I had inherited when my parents passed 3 years ago. A house, paid off. A moderate but real amount in a trust. Things that, as my husband's wife, he had certain access to, and that, if I were declared mentally incapacitated, he would have complete control of. The detective stopped writing. He looked at me with the steady expression of someone putting together a picture they already suspected. "Has anyone ever suggested," he said, "that you should consider not working? That you might need someone to handle your financial affairs?" My mother-in-law had said exactly that in the kitchen 2 months ago. My husband had been standing behind her. He had not disagreed. The toxicology screen came back 4 hours later. The doctor returned with the results and the detective at the same time, which told me before either of them spoke that the results were not unremarkable. Benzodiazepines, a specific one, in a concentration that was inconsistent with any prescription I had ever been given. Consistent, the doctor said carefully, with regular low-dose administration over a period of weeks. Long enough to produce cumulative effects. Long enough to look, to anyone not testing for it specifically, like anxiety, like fragility, like a woman who could not handle the ordinary pressures of her life. I heard my husband's voice in the hallway, asking someone how much longer. His tone still perfectly calibrated, concerned, slightly frustrated, the edge of a man who has been waiting. I thought about the 4 years. I thought about the hand on my face. I thought about how the thing I had mistaken for love had simply been a longer kind of patience. The detective left the room. I heard the sound of a conversation beginning in the hallway that was not going the direction my husband had planned for it. My mother-in-law was still at the house. I learned later that a patrol car had been sent there while I was still in the ER, a formality that became something else when the officer asked to see the supplements on the kitchen counter, and my mother-in-law said she didn't know anything about any supplements, and then, in the same breath, said they were just vitamins she had ordered online for her daughter-in-law's health. The officer had requested she not touch anything and wait. She had not done the second part. She had gone for her purse. The officer had told her, with the particular firmness that brooks no discussion, to sit down. The pills were sent to the lab. The results matched. My aunt arrived that evening. My mother's younger sister, who I had not seen in 2 years because my husband had found reasons, always plausible, always gentle-sounding, to make those visits difficult. She came in with her coat still on, and sat on the edge of my hospital bed, and held my hand, and did not say anything for a full minute. Then she said, "I told your mother before she passed that I'd watch out for you. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what that meant." She had already spoken to a lawyer. She already had a plan. They were both arrested that night. My husband in the hospital parking lot, still on his phone, still performing concern for whoever was on the other end of the call. My mother-in-law at the house, seated on the living room couch she had rearranged to face the window when she moved in, as if she had already decided what the view was going to be. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the hospital bed, listening to the machines and the distant PA announcements, and thought about the morning routine I had followed without question for 8 months. The coffee, the counter, the small white pill and the capsule. My husband's hands setting them down. His voice easy and familiar. "Don't forget your vitamins." The picture on the wall of the hospital room was a generic landscape. Rolling hills, improbable light. I stared at it until the sky outside the window went from black to gray, and then I let myself feel, fully and without managing it, what I had been too foggy for months to properly access. Not rage exactly, something colder and more clarifying than rage. The specific quality of understanding that arrives when you finally see a thing as it actually is, stripped of every story you told yourself to make it bearable. They had not chosen me despite my vulnerability. They had chosen me because of my trust, because I was someone who, when handed a pill by a person she loved, swallowed it without asking why. That was over now. The next weeks moved with a different quality than the months before them. I stayed with my aunt. The house, my house, the one my parents had left me, was processed as part of the investigation. And when I finally went back to collect my things, I went with my aunt and a victim's advocate, and I walked through each room with the particular detachment of someone who has already grieved the place. My mother-in-law's additions were everywhere. The rearranged cabinets, the curtains she had replaced with ones she preferred, the framed photograph of her son at his college graduation that she had placed on my mantel above a photograph of my parents. I took my parents' photograph. I left everything else. The case moved faster than I expected. The lab analysis was comprehensive. The substance had been ordered online under my mother-in-law's email address, delivered to a P.O. box registered in a name that turned out to be a slight variation of her middle name. The dosing schedule reconstructed from the purchase history, and the levels found in my blood work was, in the prosecutor's words, deliberate and sustained. My husband's phone contained a conversation with his mother, stretching back 11 months, 3 months before she moved in which they discussed the trust, the house, and what my husband called the timeline. The words sat in the prosecutor's brief like something exposed by excavation. The timeline. As if I had been a project with a completion date. My aunt sat beside me in the courtroom. She held my hand through the reading of the charges: conspiracy, aggravated assault, poisoning, attempted financial fraud, and through the parade of evidence. My coworker testified about the morning she found me on the floor. The paramedic testified about my husband's behavior in the ambulance bay. The doctor testified about the toxicology results. A financial forensics expert testified about the specific provisions of my parents' trust and the circumstances under which my husband would have gained full control. My mother-in-law wore a beige blazer and looked at the jury with the expression she had always saved for people she considered beneath her consideration. My husband sat with his hands folded and his jaw set in the particular posture of a man who had decided the best remaining strategy was dignified silence. It didn't help either of them. The jury was out for less than a day, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The judge reviewed the evidence summary, the victim impact statement I had written at my kitchen table in my aunt's house over the course of 4 evenings, rewriting it until it said exactly what I meant and nothing more. She looked at my husband and his mother for a long moment before she began speaking. My husband received 9 years. My mother-in-law received 7. The judge noted, in language that I memorized because I needed to, that the premeditation involved in this case the months of planning, the deliberate targeting of a person in a position of trust. The sustained nature of the poisoning placed it among the more egregious cases of domestic harm she had seen in her years on the bench. There were no cameras outside the courthouse. It was a Tuesday. The sky was the flat, pale gray of early March, and the air smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. My aunt walked beside me to her car. We didn't rush. The new apartment was on the third floor of a building 2 miles from my office. Small, clean, with windows that faced east, so the mornings came in strong and uncomplicated. I bought a coffee maker I had chosen myself. I arranged my books in the order I preferred. I put my parents' photograph on the shelf beside my bed, where I could see it from the pillow. The first morning I woke up there, I lay still for a moment before getting up, a habit from the months of fog, checking internally before committing to the day. And I noticed, with something that felt like wonder, that there was nothing to find. No heaviness behind my eyes, no cotton wool thickness in my thoughts, no sense of something being quietly wrong in a way I couldn't name. Just morning, just light, just air moving through a window I had opened myself. My husband called once from a pretrial holding facility, before sentencing, through a prison phone. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice had lost the calibration entirely. By then, there was no performance left in it. Just a flat and exhausted quality that I recognized as someone encountering, for the first time, a consequence they had genuinely not believed was coming. He said he wanted to explain. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said, and here was the part I listened to twice, just to be sure I had heard it correctly, that I needed to understand this wasn't about me. I saved the voicemail. Not for legal purposes, the case was already resolved. I saved it because it was the most honest thing he had said to me in 4 years, and honesty from him was such a foreign object that I wanted to keep it somewhere I could look at it. A few weeks after I moved in, my aunt came for dinner. We cooked in my kitchen and opened a bottle of wine, and sat at my small table, and talked the way we used to talk before I was married, easily and late into the evening. She asked me how I was, not the transactional version of the question, but the real one, with her eyes on mine. I told her the truth. I told her that I was still learning how to trust my own perceptions, that there is a specific damage done by months of having your reality quietly rewritten, and that the damage doesn't end the day the source of it is removed. I told her that I still caught myself second-guessing, wondering whether what I saw was what was real, checking and rechecking, listening for footsteps in a house where no one else lived. She listened without interrupting, which is a rarer gift than most people know. Then she said, "Your mother used to say you were the kind of person who finds the good in everyone until there is genuinely none left to find." She said it like it was the finest thing about you. She was right. I thought about that for a long time after she left. The thing about being poisoned slowly, not all at once in some dramatic and unmistakable way, but gradually, in doses small enough to dismiss, in a context wrapped in the language of care, is that it teaches you to distrust comfort. To flinch at the ordinary offerings. A cup of tea someone made for you. A small gesture that arrives without explanation. The impulse of a person who loves you to press something into your hands and say this will help. It takes time to learn again how to receive those things, to let them be what they appear to be, to stop holding them up to the light, looking for what is hidden inside. I am still learning, that is the honest answer. But I am learning it in a kitchen that belongs entirely to me, with a coffee maker I selected, at a table I chose, in an apartment where every object is present because I wanted it there. And that is not nothing. That is, in fact, almost everything. The case made a small amount of news. The kind of story that appears on local outlets and true crime-adjacent blogs, and gets shared in the specific corners of the internet, where people who have survived similar things find each other. I didn't read most of it. What I knew, which was what I had lived, was sufficient. My mother-in-law gave an interview to a local reporter from the facility where she was awaiting transfer. I was told about it secondhand by my attorney. She had said, among other things, that she had only ever wanted what was best for her son. That she had never understood why I had taken what she characterized as a mutual family difficulty and made it into something criminal. That some people, she said, and I recognize the cadence of it, even filtered through a second-hand account, simply cannot handle the ordinary pressures of life without finding someone else to blame. I smiled when I heard that, a genuine one, because what she still did not understand, and what I no longer needed her to understand, was that I had never once blamed the ordinary pressures. I had very specifically, with documented evidence and a competent prosecutor and a jury of 12 people who had listened to every detail, blamed exactly the right thing. I called my aunt that evening, not to talk about any of it, just to check in. She answered on the second ring. We talked for an hour about nothing consequential, a book she was reading, a renovation project at her house, the weather coming in from the coast. Before we hung up, she said, "You sound different, better." I told her I was sleeping again. I told her the mornings were good, and when I set the phone down on the table beside my parents' photograph, I looked at my mother's face, in the frame, that particular expression of hers, the one that was always half warmth and half dare, and I thought about what she would say if she could see this apartment, this table, this quiet. I think she would say I was fine, and this time she would be exactly right. There are things this story is about that go beyond what happened in my kitchen and my office and that courtroom. They go to something most of us know and very few of us say out loud, that the harm done by people who are supposed to love us is not smaller because of who they are. It is larger. It carries a specific weight that a stranger's cruelty never could, because it arrives wrapped in something we trusted, delivered in doses we were conditioned to accept. My husband and his mother did not succeed because they were particularly clever. They succeeded, for as long as they did, because I was someone who assumed good faith, who interpreted confusion as my own failing, who swallowed what was handed to me and told myself it must be medicine. The hardest thing I have had to accept is not what they did. It is how thoroughly they used my own decency as the mechanism. But here is what I also know. On the morning my coworker found me on that office floor, she did not hesitate. She called for help immediately, and she stayed beside me until it arrived. The paramedic read a situation in 30 seconds that I had been living inside for 8 months without being able to name it. The detective asked the right questions. The prosecutor built the case. The jury paid attention. None of that was dramatic. None of it was a scene. It was just people doing their jobs and doing them well, and it was enough. If you have been told that your pain is performance, your concern is overreaction, your instincts are the product of sensitivity rather than perception, listen to this part. The people who benefit from your self-doubt are the ones most invested in maintaining it. The fact that someone loves you, or claims to, does not make their account of your reality more accurate than your own. Your body keeps score when your mind has been talked out of the record. Trust it. Document everything. Tell someone. Accept help from the people who offer it without a condition attached. And if the time ever comes when you have to sit in a courtroom and hear the evidence read back in the dry language of formal proceedings, the timeline, the dosage, the deliberate and sustained nature of it, you will not need to perform anything. You will not need to shout or argue or convince anyone of what you lived. The facts will carry it. The truth does not need a scene. Let it do the work.